away as if she didn't want his sympathy or his understanding. The spoiled female had always had a temper. He and Hadleigh had witnessed it often, but Jonah had never seen her as agitated as this.
How can I calm down? I've never been more desperate than I am at this moment. I refuse to marry Hadleigh. I refuse.
I can't see why, Jonah said again. You know him better than any other suitor who's asked for your hand.
That's just the point. I know what he's really like. He's opinionated and domineering, and he'll rule me with an iron hand. Don't you remember how it was when we plotted ways to escape the tutors his father employed to give us an education? We always had to go along with what Hadleigh decided. He wouldn't give up until we did.
She paced around a bed of beautiful asters, this time coming perilously close to stepping on the blossoms.
The same was true when we plotted ways to avoid that ugly, bratty sister of his. Hadleigh always decided where we'd hide to escape her, and we had to go along with what he said.
That's because Hadleigh came up with the best idea.
Oh, leave it to you to stand up for him. You were always his most loyal follower.
Jonah frowned. I don't understand why you're so repulsed by him. You used to be quite fond of him. And how can you say his sister was ugly? She wasn't. She was simply at an awkward age. Besides, she only wanted to be included, and looking back, even you have to admit we were cruel not to include her.
We were no such thing!
Melisande fired her denial in a voice that hardly sounded like the lady Jonah knew she had been raised to be.
She was a ghastly brat. She should have been drowned at birth. Serves Hadleigh right. Now he's going to have to find some unsuspecting fool who's as blind as well as desperate for her money who will stoop to marry her. She'll never find a husband on her own.
You can't mean that.
Can't I? Have you seen her? If I were Hadleigh, I wouldn't even acknowledge her. She's nothing at all to look at.
Jonah stopped. For the first time he looked at Melisande, really looked at her. When had her thoughts turned so cruel? When had she begun to consider herself so elevated, and everyone else so far beneath her?
Oh, don't look at me like that, she fired at him. You thought the same thing. We all did. She's as repulsive as that clumsy, bookish Amanda Radburn you always see her with.
He couldn't believe Melisande had become so hard, that she exhibited so little concern for others. How had this happened? Suddenly he knew. The change hadn't just happened. She'd always had those traits. It's just that he had never noticed them because he had been enamored by her incomparable beauty, the same as everyone else. Tonight, though, she didn't seem nearly so beautiful. Why have you chosen me to free you from the betrothal agreement your father and Hadleigh signed?
Because we're friends. You owe me.
I owe you?
Well, perhaps you don't owe me,
she said, the tone of her voice turning softer, the expression on her face more demure.
But you had to realise that Hadleigh's and my association with you opened doors that wouldn't ordinarily have been opened.
Jonah fought the budding anger inside him. How did Hadleigh's association with me, or with you for that matter, open any doors?
Oh, Jonah, don't be so obtuse. Everyone knows that Hadleigh is as rich as Croesus. So is my father. They come from the finest bloodlines.
And me? Jonah unclenched his fists and pretended Melisandre's comparison hadn't affected him like a vicious slap across the face, even though it had.
Well, you're only a second son, and your father was never known to invest his money wisely, which is another reason you should jump at the chance to marry me.
That would be advantageous now, wouldn't it? He answered, his mockery totally unnoticed by her.
Of course it would. See, I knew you'd see it my way. I knew you'd realise the advantages of marrying me.